Welcome to the 2022 Candidates Debate, moderated by the nonpartisan League of Women Voters of New Canaan. Candidates, thank you for being here tonight. We are grateful to Town Hall for allowing us to use this space and to NCTV Channel 79 for their production of the debate. Voters, we know your time is precious, so this year we are hosting 5 separate debates so you can watch only the races applicable to you. A reminder that edited or partial usage of tonight's program is not permitted. For the first time at one of our debates, we are excited to welcome a select group of seniors from the New Canaan High School debate team. They got to meet our candidates earlier and will be presenting the debate questions throughout the evening. It is heartwarming to know that when asked, these students enthusiastically raised their hands and were excited about participating in our democracy. Our hope is that by having these students here, more citizens, both young, old, and in between, will tune in, get informed, and vote. Questions for tonight's debate were submitted to the League from the public in advance. I want to thank everyone who took the time to let us know the issues they cared about most this election. In accordance with our nonpartisan guidelines, our carefully selected team reviews the questions and often rewrites them for comprehensiveness, fairness, nonpartisanship, applicability to all candidates, and relevance to the office. The candidates have all agreed to a set of debate rules for the evening. While our students will present the questions, I will remain here and be responsible for enforcing the rules, including time limitations. But I don't think it will come to that. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Elizabeth Sawyer from the New Canaan High School debate team, who will ask the questions for this debate.
Welcome to the candidate debate for Representative District 42, serving voters in parts of New Canaan, Richfield, and Wilton. Our candidates are Keith Denning and Kim Healy. The debate will begin with opening statements, followed by questions submitted by the public. Candidates will be allowed a 1.5-minute response, followed by an additional 30-second rebuttal. We will end with closing statements. Based on random draw, we begin with opening remarks from Keith Denning.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters in the town of New Canaan for hosting this debate. Since March of this year, I've been talking to people in the newly created 42nd State House District, asking them what concerns them the most about the state and the country. I heard many answers: the economy, schools, taxes, inflation, the reversal of Roe, vaccine and mask mandates, commuting, and the defense of our democracy have all been topics that are important to the voters. I want the people in the district to know that I've listened and that I heard. Tonight you get to hear from me. Voters will be given the chance to hear what my challenger and I have to say about important issues and what thoughts are important to issues in the state. It is the voters' opportunity to note our similarities and, more important, our differences. Just as you, I also have questions for my challenger. Does she admit that the President Biden was legitimately elected the President of the United States without widespread voter fraud? Was the attack on the Capitol an insurrection, or was it just, as quoted, acceptable political debate? And does a woman have a fundamental right to control her body and her health care, including her reproductive health care?
Kim Healy, it's now your turn.
Okay. So thank you all for having me here today, the League of Women Voters, and to you, those watching from home. My name is Kim Healy. My husband and I moved to Connecticut in 1994, and when our family outgrew our first home, we moved to Wilton in 2008. I am a wife, a mother of 4 wonderful children, ages 25 to 16. We also have 2 dogs and a cat, busy household. I am a CPA, a trained accountant, and I was an auditor with PricewaterhouseCoopers. I am currently Wilton's Select Woman, co-chair of Minx to Sinks, and I'm an appointed member of the Connecticut Reading Leadership Implementation Council. I'm also a volunteer tax preparer through the AARP, serving retired and low-income individuals and families. Previously, I've served on Wilton Conservation Commission, and I was the treasurer of the Wilton Library Board. I have been honored to serve my community in these and many other capacities. I look forward to the questions tonight.
Okay, thank you. Now we will start with the first question. 30 years after Statute 830G on affordable housing was enacted, less than a quarter of Connecticut towns meet the target of having 10% of housing stock deemed affordable. What do you think are reasonable affordable housing goals for Connecticut, and how would you achieve them? Keith Denning?
Thank you for the question. First of all, 830G does not require 10% all towns have, or towns have 10% of affordable housing. That's one of the guidelines the state wrote into the law that said if you don't have it, you must fall under that particular rule. We have a housing crisis here in Connecticut. We have the first things people complain to me about are high taxes, and they want more businesses to come back. And ASML is coming with a $200 million advancement in development in Wilton. They want to bring in 1,000 new people to work there. Where are these people going to live? It costs a lot of money to rent a home, to buy a home, to pay your property taxes in this part of Connecticut and in most parts along the coastal Connecticut. And these people want to live where they work. I think 830G has failed in its objective. If it had worked, we would have had plenty of affordable housing by now. What is not working, though, is the state's management of finding housing for people in areas where they want to live and where they want to work. We need to find solutions where towns can work with developers to build housing that people can afford, and that the towns will welcome those people into their communities.
Kim Healy?
Sure. So I would, just agree with Keith that Connecticut 830G is, it allows for developers to override local planning and zoning if the community does not have 10% of, according to state law, affordable housing in its town. It was passed 30 years ago, and almost everyone agrees that it has failed in its objective, though the majority party in our state refuses to amend or repeal it. I was an active member of Connecticut 169 Strong, who held rallies and informative forums all over Connecticut to let people know what the legislation was to actually push through even more affordable housing last session. When it comes to affordable housing, the way that the criteria are presently, there has to be, this stinks. All right, hold on, let me think. It has to be deed restricted is one of the criteria. And one of the things that I know that we're doing back in Wilton is we are evaluating our housing stock to see which also homes would fit into the affordable except without the deed restriction. And therefore, we would have a better feeling of how affordable our towns already are outside of the 830G rule.
And now, Keith Dunning, you can start with your rebuttal.
I think it's important for my challenger to admit that we have a housing shortage and approximately 100,000 units in the state. Our governor tells us that he wants to bring new companies in, and when new companies come in, we don't even have place for the companies to locate, much less the people where they're going to live. Until we get serious about figuring out where we're going to welcome people into our communities and find them places where they can live, we're not going to address our tax situation or our economy seriously.
Kim Healy?
Oh, good. All right. So what I would say is that we have a lot of housing being built right on the border, say, of Wilton, right in Norwalk, which would be considered more affordable than what we have in Wilton. We have developments happening in Wilton that were approved and went through our local process in Wilton, which, and then you have New Canaan where you have, oh my gosh, am I done? Oh, sorry. Weed Street, which again is not being decided locally. They're trying to have state rules decide.
All right, now on to question 2. All states need revenue to provide services. What would you change about the ways Connecticut generates its revenue or how it spends it? Kim Healy?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. All states need revenue to provide services. What would you change about the ways Connecticut generates its revenue or how it spends it?
Well, we generate most of our revenue through income tax. We are the second highest taxed state in the United States. So I would like to actually see us have lower revenue streams coming into the state, and we should really be looking at the way we create our budget and do our expenses. The way it's done now, we calculate our appropriations first and then back into the revenue sources. So I would rather us review how that is done before we try to come up with any new revenue sources.
Keith Denning, your turn.
Thank you. Yes, we are highly taxed, and the majority of our taxes are property taxes, which are not taxed by the state. These are levied by our towns. That 90% of it goes towards funding our schools, another 5% towards our police, our fire departments, and our infrastructure at the local level. And yes, it's expensive to live here because our property is expensive. There's many people living on 2 and 3 acre lots. So if these lots are that large and you want to decrease your taxes, the only way to do that is to invite more people into your town. It's simple math. What we have to look at as far as taxes we could cut, yeah, I'd love to have a lower state income tax. It's right now, I think we should be more comparable with where we are with Massachusetts. I don't like the car tax, but that's, again, money that is deposited directly into the town's coffers. And this is money that is probably the most regressive tax that we have. I also don't like the way that we raise money on what I call the walking down the street, talking down the street, going to a theater tax. I think we're actually being fairly fiscally prudent right now with the way our government is managing our debt. We've paid down over $6 billion on our pension fund, and we're saving money.
Kim Healy, your turn for your rebuttal.
There's not a lot to rebut except to say that when Lamont came into office, he did a review of all of our programs and services. There was $80 million of easy cuts that could have been implemented. They have yet to be implemented.
Keith Denning.
I would love to have you elaborate on any of those 80 million easy cuts. I don't think there's any easy cuts in any time that you're talking about governmental work. It's always going to affect someone. I think what we've done is refilling the rainy day fund instead of giving all the money and giving a $650 million tax cut to the middle class as well as property tax cuts. I think this governor's done a great job. I want to continue to do it, pay down our debt, use our money wisely.
Okay, perfect. On to question 3. Connecticut is one of the few states that does not allow no excuse early voting, and our legislator cannot consider early voting measures without a change to our Constitution. The November 8th ballot will ask voters if they approve such a change to our state constitution. Many voters want to know if they vote yes, what early voting measures a candidate will support. What is your position on early voting, and if elected, what specific early voting measures would you support? Keith Denning.
The answer is yes. Early voting, more people who vote in a democracy, the better off we are with getting people's opinions and representation. I'm for a wide variety of early voting options as far as days of week, days or times of the week, as long as we're considerate of the cost burden that this puts on many of the towns. I know that Stephanie Thomas, running for Secretary of the State, is considering resolving this issue, and she wants to look at what's going on nationwide. We're only one of 4 states not currently offering early voting, and I think we can learn a lot from those who've already adopted it, and I suggest that we do so and hope that you all support this measure on the ballot.
Kim Healy.
I also agree that we should have some form of early voting. It is, I believe, safer. I would like to see it potentially offered, say, on the Saturday before Election Day, if Election Day could not become a holiday, which I think would be a better solution. But, living in this area and being a commuter to New York, there have been times when, for some reason, you can't get home to vote. It would have been easier to plan ahead the previous weekend to vote. I am really concerned about the cost to implement extended voting if it is done much more than, say, a day or two in advance of our current election day. We would need to ensure that we have really strict regulations surrounding security of the ballots and signature verification, and would want to see and get a lot of input from the residents of Connecticut and see what their feelings are about this.
Keith Denning, your rebuttal.
No rebuttal, thank you.
Kim Healy, anything to?
No, thank you.
Okay, on to question 4. Connecticut recently enacted legislation to protect the rights of persons both receiving and providing reproductive health care services, and to codify access to more reproductive health care service providers. Do you support Connecticut's current position and why? Or what changes, if any, would you recommend? Kim Healy?
I'm just going to assume that was like a general women's rights question. Would that be correct? So Connecticut passed the Freedom of Choice Act in 1990 with 100% of the state Senate and 87% of the state House in favor. The law allows for abortions up to 26 weeks and in the third trimester only to preserve the life or health of the mother. There is no minimum age in Connecticut to have an abortion and no requirements that anyone is notified or provide consent for a minor child seeking an abortion. I am a pro-choice candidate. I believe that women must be able to make all health care decisions on their own and in private with their doctors. Government must never interfere with anyone's medical or health decisions. I think you're going to see a lot of national rhetoric around this issue, and in this race, I don't see it being relevant.
Keith Denning?
I think the word national rhetoric is a weakness when we recognize that the Supreme Court actually overturned a 50-year-old law that was established rule of law. And for somebody who represents precedents, or they're supposed to recognize precedents, we are not safe from the Republican Party on Roe or any other state-level issue. The Republican National Party has an agenda that they plan on running through the states, and while everyone can say that they are for choice, where are you really going to support choice? Are you going to make sure that Medicaid is covering it if Medicare doesn't, or if insurance doesn't cover it? And how restrictive are you going to be? Is this something that a doctor and his patient are going to have complete and total control over? I actually have been involved in the procedure of abortion in my healthcare practice. It is never a situation that is easy. It is never a situation that does not have tears and suffering involved on all parties. I don't think you can take this position of anyone but a Democrat who says that they are pro-choice in all circumstances.
Kim Healy, your rebuttal?
You know, they said don't make facial expressions or comments when other people are speaking. You realize you will be elected to represent Republicans. Is that something you're not really aware of? Do you not care that you have just basically insulted every Republican
Sorry,
that lives in this area?
we're not supposed to be communicating with each other, just.
Oh, okay. Well, that's really all I need to say.
Keith Denning, your rebuttal?
I don't think I've insulted any Republican. I think I basically insulted anybody who supports a Republican National Committee that has made it their national agenda for over 50 years to repeal Roe v. Wade. And now that it is done, they have come out again and said that their next objective is to codify it on a federal level. This is not idle threats, people. When people say they're going to do something, you should listen to them.
Okay, on to question 5. Connecticut residents have faced increased energy costs and service disruptions. What legislation would you propose to improve our energy and resource infrastructure to ensure future access and affordability? Keith Denning?
Thank you. This is a great question because our current energy situation was an attempt to bring our electric rates down by opening up the electric markets so that we could buy from whoever was creating it at the cheapest cost. And this was back in the 90s when electricity was fluctuating pretty low. We should have learned from the 1970s when I was a very young man at the time, and when we first had our Arab oil embargoes. And I remember having long lines then for fuel and oil and really cold winters that were expensive and hard to manage. America has never gotten off the cocaine of oil or the heroin of fossil fuels. And we need to enact both nationally and on local levels anything we can do to move us towards renewable energy, solar, wind, especially off the sound, geothermal, and give tax credits that we can to get those people who cannot normally afford it, or when there are times for their oil burner to be replaced, they can make this conversion, and we can make it as quickly as possible to not only protect our environment, but also to get us energy independent from those who produce oil right now, which is primarily Russia.
Kim Healy, your turn.
Yeah. Okay. So, as you know, because you get your bills, we have the third highest electric rates in the U.S. Some of the factors of why Connecticut costs so much, we have the largest number of added fees to our Connecticut bills by our Connecticut government. I would like to see them pull them out and have those expenses run through our state general spending budget. And that's almost 20% of our bill is through public policy, which are hardship programs, energy efficiency programs, certain environmental goals, which require zero carbon energy programs, and they cost more. And unfortunately, everything in our state costs more and is reflected in our utility costs. Salaries, land costs, repair costs, taxes, all of that gets passed on to us, the ratepayer. 40% of our electricity comes from the Millstone nuclear power plant, and that was almost closed. It was saved by Republicans pushing to keep it open. And without it, we would be paying even higher rates as natural gas must be brought in through outdated infrastructure pipelines. I do believe that we need to have a balance of where our energy comes from, green, gas, nuclear, but we must keep costs down. We have the highest rates in the U.S., and it is unfair to the residents of our state. Something that we should be doing as well is we should be having PURA, which we all learned about after the hurricane of 2020, and we should make that an independent of any government influence. Thank you.
Keith Denning, your rebuttal.
So I would like to thank the Republicans who kept the nuclear power plant open. That may be the only thing I thank them for tonight. But you're right, we need to keep in mind all forms of energy. All of the bills that you're talking about in fees are bills that are to help us transition away from fossil fuels and into renewable energy, as well as mitigate climate change. I'm not sure we need to give up those fees. The faster we get off oil, the faster we get off coal, the better we are.
Kim Healy?
I just would argue that we need to have a balance because the few things that you have mentioned how much do you expect the people to pay?
Okay, thank you. On to question 6. Other than reducing taxes, what ideas can you offer for Connecticut to attract new employers, retain jobs, and make Connecticut a more affordable place to live? Kim Healy?
We need to attack this from all sides. Our state has, like I've said earlier, I think we're the second highest tax state in the country. We have the highest land costs, the highest property taxes, like Keith had mentioned. There are things that we can do. I have signed on to a contract with Connecticut that the House Republicans will be pushing through regardless if I get elected or not in November. And some of the suggestions that are going to be put forth, and hopefully we'll get at least a hearing, would be to lower the income tax from 5% to 4% for families making less than $175,000 a year, to repeal the highway use tax on trucks that starts in 2023. And this was passed in 2021, and it will drive up the cost of food, consumer products, and services. To increase the property tax credit, which can be claimed for personal property and motor vehicles, to increase that from $300 to $500 for all families filing state income taxes. To reduce the sales tax and eliminate the 1% meals tax that was just implemented. And to repeal taxes and fees which cost more to collect than revenues they generate. Thanks.
Keith Denning?
I would agree that reducing some of the fees, they seem to be onerous on sometimes in Connecticut. However, think about what we get for our dollar. We pay high tax costs, but we have one of the highest highest educational services in our public schooling in the country. We have the best health care in the country. If we want to bring people to come and live here, it's housing. Our housing is outrageously expensive. We need to find a place where companies will come, find a workforce that's already being trained in our great schools and educational facilities, and find a place where they can live and get around faster. I propose we build an infrastructure for the 23rd century so that we can help those employees and employers match up so that inside the state, so they're not traveling back and forth to New York City, and we can actually move a workforce around to create an environment where you can live in Waterbury, you can live in Danbury, you can live in Bridgeport, and get to any job you want in the state. If we don't work on our housing and our infrastructure for transportation, we are never going to solve the problems that we have of the high cost of our land.
Kim Healy, your rebuttal?
Yeah, I would include we do need to work on our infrastructure, and we also need to really support our small businesses. There's something that I signed on, the CBIA Transform Connecticut Pledge, which will bring long-term solutions to our economic issues, with affordability, bringing jobs, and a more positive business climate.
Keith Denning?
I think we have a very positive business climate as it stands, and I would love to hear some of those specific ideas that you would use out of your plan.
We now invite our candidates to present their closing statements, starting with Keith Denning.
I believe that state government can be the breeding grounds for new and innovative ideas that can be models for the nation. They can also be breeding grounds for fear and extremism that will undermine our political system. At this time, there has never been a more stark contrast between the two major political parties. Democrats get things done. Democrats and Democrats alone pass bills that decrease gun violence, protected reproductive freedom, and demonstrated fiscal responsibility. Democrats and Democrats alone are there to find real solutions for families, seniors, small businesses, climate change, and affordability. I used to know I thought the Republican Party I thought I knew stood for less government, lower taxes, and a spending on the military. The Republican Party no longer represents those values. They've been corrupted by the far right, who reject basic democratic ideals, embrace the big lie, supported a violent and deadly overthrow of our nation's capital, and defend it as legitimate political discourse. Democrats are the party
Kim
of
Healy,
fiscal
your turn.
responsibility.
So thank you all for taking the time to watch tonight and hear us answer questions in our own voice. I've been out door knocking, trying to get to every door in the district. If you haven't seen me or my palm card at your door, I hope to get there very soon. This is what I will deliver to you as your representative: honesty, integrity, and hard work. I know these things matter, especially in this local race, perhaps now more than ever. And at the bottom line, for me, is that your government should work for you and not the other way around. I promise to listen to you. I will not prioritize my help based on your support of me or your political party. I will inform you on how I vote and why. And I will vote for what is in the best interests of New Canaan, Wilton, and Ridgefield, and to make Connecticut a state we are all proud to call home. The common thread for all these things we want for our families and for our community, and the things we can improve, is authentic leadership, not partisanship or rhetoric. I will work hard to change Connecticut so there's a better future for all of us, our families, and our children. Thank you so much.
This concludes our District 42 debate. We thank our candidates and our viewers for participating in democracy. Up next is Representative District 125, featuring Victor Alvarez and Tom O'Day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you again, candidates, for participating tonight. And thank you, Elizabeth Sawyer, for volunteering and being brave enough to ask the questions for us tonight. We hope, Elizabeth, that you are inspired to become a lifelong voter. Viewers, please be on the lookout for our nonpartisan voters guide, which should be in the mailboxes of each New Canaan resident soon. The voters guide is just one of the many activities the League does in New Canaan, including voter registration, sponsoring civics education in the schools, supporting internships and scholarships, and of course, running this debate. At a time when polarizing views and rhetoric can be the norm, it was wonderful to be here together tonight, hashing out issues in a civilized and thoughtful manner. Thank you. Welcome to the 2022 Candidates Debate, moderated by the nonpartisan League of Women Voters of New Canaan. Candidates, thank you for being here tonight. We are grateful to Town Hall for allowing us to use this space and to NCTV Channel 79 for the production of the debate. Voters, we know your time is precious, so this year we are hosting 5 separate debates, so you can watch only the races applicable to you. A reminder that edited or partial usage of tonight's program is not permitted. For the first time at one of our debates, we are excited to welcome a select group of seniors from New Canaan High School debate team. They got to meet our candidates earlier, and they will be presenting the debate questions throughout the evening. It is heartwarming to know that when asked, these students enthusiastically raised their hands and were excited about participating in our democracy. Our hope is that by having these students here, more citizens, both young, old, and in between, will tune in, get informed, and vote. Questions for tonight's debate were submitted to the League from the public in advance. I want to thank everyone who took the time to let us know the issues they cared about most this election. In accordance with our nonpartisan guidelines, our carefully selected team reviews the questions and often rewrites them. We rewrite them for comprehensiveness, fairness, nonpartisanship, applicability to all candidates, and relevance to the office. The candidates have agreed to a set of debate rules for the evening. While our students will present the questions, I will remain here and be responsible for enforcing the rules, including time limitations, but I'm sure it won't come to that. Without further ado, I would like to introduce May Campbell from the New Canaan High School debate team, who will ask the questions for this debate.
Welcome to the candidate debate for Representative District 125, serving voters in parts of Darien, New Canaan, and Stamford. Our candidates are Tom O'Day and Victor Alvarez. The debate will begin with opening statements followed by questions submitted by the public. Candidates will be allowed a 1.5-minute response followed by an optional 30-second rebuttal. We will end with closing statements. Based on random draw, we begin with opening remarks from Tom O'Day.
Thank you very much, League of Women Voters. It's been an honor representing New Canaan these past 10 years. And while I'm proud of the things I've accomplished so far, like the 2017 Republican-based budget and the opioid legislation that has saved thousands of lives, just to name 2, there are still more issues I'd like to address, particularly now that I'm in leadership as the number 2 House Republican, like securing local control of zoning, fixing 830G, securing local control of our state's number 1 educational system, and 2, making Connecticut more affordable by lowering taxes for working individuals, retirees, and businesses, and 3, making Connecticut more business-friendly. We are the only state that had more jobs in 2008 than today. I'm extremely proud of my bipartisan reputation. If you ask any Democrat in the House who the most bipartisan Republican is, I would be at the top of that list. How do you know that? Well, I've been unopposed by a Democratic opponent more often than not in the last 10 years. Chris Hussey was my mentor and seatmate when I was on the town council, and I have many Democrats, both pro-life and pro-choice, who have my signs on their lawn.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Victor Alvarez, your opening statement.
Both my parents fled communist Cuba in 1960. I was raised with a keen understanding of the destruction that an authoritarian dictator can unleash on a seemingly well-functioning society. I take January 6th very seriously. Silence is not an option. When Republicans like Cassidy Hutchinson and Liz Cheney risk their political careers to uphold our democracy, it's nothing short of patriotic. This country has given so much to my family and me, and now I'm in a position to give back by giving voters an alternative at the polls. Connecticut's financial health is rebounding strongly, and I have 32 years of experience as a financial professional, so I'm familiar with budgeting, containing costs, and delivering solutions that work. I have had over 1,000 conversations with voters to find out what is important to you, and so I can better represent you if elected. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll start with our first question for Tom O'Day. 30 years after Statute 830G on affordable housing was enacted, less than a quarter of Connecticut towns meet the target for having 10% of housing stock deemed affordable. What do you think are reasonable affordable housing goals for Connecticut, and how would you achieve them?
That's a very good question, and something that I'm very familiar with. Over the 10 years that I've been in Hartford, Republicans have proposed many changes to 830G. 830G has been in place for many, many years, decades, and it's a one one policy to fit all just doesn't work. They require 10% affordable housing, and that should not be the case. Each municipality should be looked at based on its percent development and its population, and frankly, what it's done. New Canaan has done an outstanding job, frankly, of at least trying to do something. Laszlo Papp instituted the fee attached to every building permit to raise money to have affordable housing built and renovated. We've renovated all of our affordable housing over the last 5 to 10 years, and we've doubled our affordable housing stock. We obviously can do better, but 830G is being used as a predatory, by predatory builders to try and increase their profits. And so I think what we need to do is fight 830G proposals like what's going on at Weed Street in 4 ways. One, try and figure out a solution to our affordable housing issue. 830G does not solve that. 830G, frankly, puts money in the pockets of developers and does not encourage putting in more affordable housing. So I think if we tailor it to have lower percentage of affordable housing requirements, that we'll do much better in getting affordable housing going forward.
Thank you. Victor Alvarez, your response?
Since 2016, I've been on record about being against overdevelopment. When I was the condo board president in the condos next to the View on Park Street in New Canaan, I vehemently opposed this project by speaking at New Canaan planning and zoning meetings. The project removed 38 units of naturally occurring affordable housing and replaced them with over 100 very expensive units. The developer got the planning and zoning approval by threatening the town with a large affordable housing project in its place. I preferred affordable housing. My opposition was based on the scale, the look, and the expensive prices of the individual units. I think most of us agree that providing affordable housing in town strengthens our community. But we've had 830G since 1989, and it hasn't changed. It needs to be fixed. I would change the percentage of the threshold percentage from 10% to 5% for Fairfield County suburban towns. I would offer property owners tax incentives for deed restricting their rental properties, including their accessory dwelling units. And under 830G, even when developers are in a position to circumvent the local planning and zoning board, they're still subject to certain rules like coverage and setbacks. There should be an additional mandatory density restriction rule added to this list.
All right, Tom O'Day, your rebuttal?
Yeah, so what have I done with regard to 830G? I've met with the chair of the housing committee. I've toured him around New Canaan for 3.5 hours. He's promised me to propose or to allow us to have hearings on 830G and propose changes. Republicans have put forth dozens of proposed changes, but we haven't had support on the other side of the aisle for changing 830G. We need more Republicans, quite frankly, elected up in Hartford in order to negotiate further changes to 830G. 5% is even unattainable at this point in time, so we need more changes. Thank
Victor
you.
Alvarez, your rebuttal?
Constituents are saying that 830G is one of the most important issues facing this district. My opponent's been in the seat for 10 years, and under his watch, 830G has not changed. I believe that if you send me to Hartford as a Democrat, I would join the moderate caucus, and I would have a better chance of moving the dial on this issue. And in terms of the perspective of there's too many Democrats in Hartford, I would say another perspective is that there are too many lawyers in Hartford. And in the general, and there are not enough
All right,
business
thank
people.
you. The second question, all states need revenue to provide services. What would you change about the ways Connecticut generates its revenue or how it spends it? Victor Alvarez?
Okay, so let's start with jobs. The recent jobs outlook in Connecticut is on the upswing, but it is critical for the health of our economy to attract companies to Connecticut because companies moving to the state materially increase our tax revenues, which means we can keep taxes flat or lower taxes for our residents. So I would attract companies to Connecticut by expanding the research and development tax credit to reward companies that relocate to Connecticut and generate new products through innovation. I would underwrite job training programs through the Office of Workflow Strategy to provide entry-level skills for jobs with a future in healthcare, technology, clean energy infrastructure, bioscience, and manufacturing, because this will attract companies to Connecticut and increase our revenues. We need to fix 830G, as was the last question discussed, so to provide appropriate and realistic housing and attract the workforce we want to have. And I think attracting or the prospect of attracting renewable energy companies to Connecticut, I believe
All right,
would.
thank you.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks.
Tom O'Day, your response?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. All states need revenue to provide services. What would you change about the ways Connecticut generates its revenue or how it spends it?
So, over the last 10 years that I've been in office, the CBIA has given me virtually 100% ranking on growing small business. We have less jobs now than we had in 2008. We need to make Connecticut more affordable. Governor Lamont was correct when he said that it's too hard to start a business in Connecticut. That's why his wife is bringing her business to Tennessee. Connecticut has less, like I said, less jobs that we had in '08 now, and literally our unfunded debt has gone from $75 billion 2 years ago to $95 billion now, and that's because of the excessive spending. I would roll back a 10% across-the-board cut in all of the departments, and I would cut taxes. I would literally, if for $500 million or less, we can make Connecticut the best place in the country to retire by eliminating the taxes on pensions, eliminating the tax on Social Security, and eliminating the estate tax. That will increase our revenue and make people stay in Connecticut over the long term. And it'll increase our property values dramatically. Connecticut needs to grow private sector jobs and not vote unbelievable. We've got the #1 highest paid public sector in the country. We're one of the only states that the public sector makes more than the private sector for the same job. We have great public sector workers, but we can't afford to keep increasing their rate by 5%, and we can't give them bonuses like they've been done.
Victor Alvarez, your rebuttal.
The increase in the state debt that my opponent refers to is mostly due to a change in the formula that calculates the debt. So the weighted average cost of capital was changed, and that was the material difference in why the debt increased recently.
All right, thank you. Tom O'Day, your rebuttal.
It was the 2017 budget that has created all these surpluses. William Tong called me after the governor vetoed the 2017 Republican budget and said, "Tom, can we meet and try and get a bipartisan solution?" 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats, I was one of them, met and created this bipartisan budget that is now creating these surpluses. Unfortunately, my Democratic colleagues in Hartford have gone on a spending spree over the last 5 years to
Thank
create
you.
what's going on now.
For the third question, Connecticut is one of the few states that does not allow no excuse early voting, and our legislature cannot consider early voting measures without a change to our constitution. The November 8th ballot will ask voters if they approve such a change to our state constitution. Many voters want to know if they vote yes, what early voting measures a candidate will support. What is your position on early voting, and if elected, what specific early voting measures would you support? Tom O'Day?
Yes, so I do support no excuse absentee balloting. And that's going to be, I voted on it, and that is going to eventually become part of our Constitution. And that will allow anybody to vote for any reason by absentee. I do believe, though, we have to secure our absentee ballots. There was the Democratic Town Committee chair from Stamford was convicted last month of 28 felony counts of fraud. And because of abusing and harvesting absentee ballots. We've got to do more to secure those absentee ballots. I also believe we need voter ID. You need to show picture ID in order to vote. You need to show picture ID to get medication. You need to show it to get on a plane. You need to show it to drive. And so we need to have voter identification because we need to make sure people are confident in the voting process. But I do believe in no excuse absentee voting, and and I believe that's going to happen within the next 2 years. Thank you.
Victor Alvarez, your response?
So there are 46 states that have this early voting provision already. So it's kind of embarrassing that Connecticut is one of the 4 states that doesn't. Life is complicated. One day is easy to miss. Your child gets sick, you miss the train, you're called out of town for at the last minute. We need to find balance between making voting accessible for people while protecting our election process. Voting yes on the ballot question would give legislators the ability to deliberate over what such a system might be, and it doesn't guarantee it will happen, it just starts the conversation. I would support a modest period of early voting, say 3 days including 1 weekend day. This gives some flexibility to voters, and it also respects election workers' bandwidth. I also support removing barriers to absentee voting for all people who are legally eligible to vote. But I would also note that Connecticut has a rigorous and effective election audit process that detects instances of fraud. The biggest threat to our election system is when a losing candidate asserts baseless claims that fraud occurred when it, in fact, did not.
All right, thank you. Tom O'Day, your rebuttal?
I think it sounds like we both agree on no excuse absentee balloting. The problem with early voting would be if it were outside the town clerk's office. In other words, I think it's something that I would look into and agree to if it was with the town clerk, and the municipalities would not have additional costs associated with the early voting. So I think we're pretty much on the same page on that. I just would not want to see schools interrupted for early voting.
Victor Alvarez, your rebuttal?
No rebuttal.
All right. Connecticut recently enacted legislation to protect the rights of persons both receiving and providing reproductive health care services and to codify access to more reproductive health care service providers. Do you support Connecticut's current position, and why, or what changes, if any, would you recommend? Victor Alvarez?
Yeah, I definitely support Connecticut's position. Abortion feels safer now in Connecticut, but we can't take this or any rights for granted. The Supreme Court's move to overturn Roe v. Wade is the beginning of restrictions, not the end. I believe that women should have the right to make their own choices about their reproductive health care, not the government. Since 2014, Republicans have voted to erode Connecticut abortion laws over 30 times. For example, they promote crisis pregnancy centers that masquerade as abortion clinics, but really try to talk women out of having abortions. I will do everything in my power to safeguard Connecticut's sensible abortion laws. I would support providing improved security at Connecticut's abortion clinics. And where other rights are concerned, like marriage equality, I will work tirelessly to uphold these rights for all of us. My opponent voted no on the only abortion-related bill that came before him in the 2022 legislative session. It protects Connecticut abortion providers from politically motivated out-of-state lawsuits. I would have voted yes.
All right, Tom O'Day?
Yes, so in 1990, a group of bipartisan legislators and stakeholders, including the Hartford Archdiocese, Planned Parenthood, and Right to Life groups, got together and put forth a compromise. And that was called the Freedom of Choice Act. And that compromise allows a woman, gives the woman a right to choose up until the time of viability, and past that for the health, safety, and welfare of the mother. I agree with that compromise. While I am personally pro-life, like I said, I've got many friends and relatives, including in my own family, who are pro-choice. And I have not proposed one piece of legislation to change that compromise from 1990. Abortion is not an issue in Connecticut and will not be. Unlike our federal colleagues, who back in 2006, they controlled the White House, the Senate filibuster-proof, and the House, and they made the conscious choice to not pass a codification of Roe v. Wade, unlike Connecticut, and they chose the one piece of legislation was Obamacare that they passed without a single Republican vote. They wanted it to be an election issue. Thankfully, in Connecticut, it is not an election issue. A woman's right to choose is going to continue in Connecticut. I would point out that I voted against the bill that expanded the access to abortions to non-doctors. I voted against that piece of legislation because it didn't help women. It could hurt women. There's no delay in getting an abortion for a woman in a right to choose, and that legislation would hurt women.
Victor Alvarez, your rebuttal?
Abortion is an issue in Connecticut, My opponent just admitted that he's against abortion, and he voted against the only abortion law that went before him in the 2022 legislative session. Normally, Republicans support the blocking of bogus lawsuits that increase costs for providers and healthcare recipients. But I believe my opponent voted no for this particular law for political reasons. He's hiding behind safe abortions, but we're talking about licensed professionals, not unsafe access to health
All
care.
right, thank you. Connecticut residents have faced increased energy costs and service disruptions. What legislation would you propose to improve our energy and resource infrastructure to ensure future access and affordability? Victor Alvarez?
So utility prices in general are high in Connecticut, 32% more than the national average. We suffer from transmission congestion. Connecticut's peak electricity demand has grown faster than the state's infrastructure of power plants. As a result, the transmission system has become increasingly congested. We should take part of the $5.4 billion in infrastructure money coming to Connecticut and invest in improving our infrastructure related to the transmission and distribution of electricity. Our reliance on fossil fuels that was supposed to make energy more affordable has resulted in increased volatility and has made our problems worse, especially with the recent invasion of the Ukraine. Utilities are the most lobbied industry in Connecticut, and the industry is controlled by PURA, a committee that is staffed by utility company executives that sets the rates charged by investor-owned utilities, a potential conflict of interest. I would like to introduce competition with Eversource in Connecticut, similar to what has been done in New York State. I would also explore a long-term plan to use tax incentives and rebates to underground the state's urban and suburban overhead wires in order to make the state more resilient in the face of severe weather we know is coming in the future.
All right, thank you. Tom O'Day?
So I'm hearing that the fossil fuels are a bad thing. I will tell you that not a single Republican voted for some legislation that's been passed in Connecticut to follow California's emission standards. Unfortunately, the majority, and most of the time legislation is bipartisan, but this is one of the situations where it was not. The majority forced through legislation that requires us to follow the emission standards of California, which, and we all know that California prices are outrageous. Literally, California said we're going to get rid of fossil fuel vehicles, and I'm sorry, you can't, on the same day they said, I'm sorry, you can't charge your cars. We don't have enough power to do that. And so I propose legislation year after year to allow private investment to come in and build community solar. And every year the Democrats and the unions fight that legislation. And I'm hopeful that if we get enough Republicans voted, my legislation to promote community solar will pass and we'll have more energy generation. And I would also say that if it wasn't for Republicans, Millstone, the nuclear plant, would have been closed down. It's because of Republicans who have tried to promote community solar, nuclear option, and more generation through private investment. And unfortunately, it's the Democrats that have fought me on that.
All right, Victor Alvarez, your rebuttal?
My opponent had 5 laws come before him over the last 2 years that were for regulating emissions, and he voted no all 5 times. And he sits on the Environment Committee of the House of Representatives. So I'm a little baffled by that, but I feel like he doesn't take seriously the fact that emissions pollute, and it's a direct cause of climate change.
Tom O'Day, your rebuttal?
So I believe in alternative fuels. I bought hybrid. I believe in solar. But we need other sources. And literally, natural gas vehicles were a great thing. Unfortunately, the majority is now outlawing natural gas vehicles after Norwalk spent millions of dollars in purchasing natural gas vehicles. This administration and the legislature ended incentives for putting in more natural gas throughout the state. We need to have fossil fuels until we can generate enough non-emission energy. Thank you.
Other than reducing taxes, what ideas can you offer for Connecticut to attract new employers, retain jobs, and make Connecticut a more affordable place to live? Tom O'Day?
Other than reduced taxes? Could you repeat that question?
Yeah. Other than reducing taxes, what ideas can you offer for Connecticut to attract new employers, retain jobs, and make Connecticut a more affordable place to live?
Well, we have to make opening a business easier. 2019 was the most anti-business session in our history. We put in an automatically increasing $15 minimum wage. I would, at the very least, stop the automatic increase to that. They put in without a Republican vote, they put in the most generous paid family medical leave program in the country that even the state wasn't in compliance with. Literally, an employer of two has to provide 14 weeks paid vacation or leave for any employee that requests it for not just immediately family members. Mind you, the federal law applies to employers of 50 or more because they know that if you apply it to a small employer, it could devastate their business. But the majority, without a single Republican vote, makes it applicable to employers of two or more. Imagine running a small business when two or three of your employees take paid family medical leave that for friends, not even immediate family members. Look, it's a great idea, but even California puts it in the private sector with insurance. The paid family medical leave, the automatically increasing minimum wage, and the weaponization of the CHRO, which is the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, has been a disaster for small businesses, and we need to change that.
All right, thank you. Victor Alvarez?
I think improving our infrastructure is a key way to attract businesses to Connecticut. And we can do that by making improvements to Connecticut's train bridges to speed up train service. I heard Governor Lamont say that thanks to the Democrats in Washington, D.C. and their infrastructure bill, we're going to take 20 minutes off the commute from Stamford to New York City. So changes like that, improving our electricity transmission and distribution, undergrounding overhead wires to make Connecticut more resilient. All of these infrastructure improvements attract companies to Connecticut and create jobs and create more tax revenues.
All right. Tom O'Day, your rebuttal?
Look, we were going to get the infrastructure change, and the increased speed of the trains had nothing to do with the latest infrastructure bill from Washington. I do agree with my opponent that putting more money into the infrastructure is a good thing. What I disagree with him on is how to implement it. We didn't need this stimulus. That's the reason for our outrageous inflation. Our transportation fund, if it wasn't rated by the Democrats over the last 15 years, would have billions of dollars more in it for our infrastructure.
All right, thank you. Victor Alvarez?
I would say that inflation was caused by supply chain disruptions due to COVID and the energy price increases caused by the Ukrainian invasion by the Russians. So whenever you hear people giving you reasons that inflation is skyrocketing because of the Democrats, you should be a little suspicious.
All right. We invite our candidates to now present their closing statements, starting with Tom O'Day.
As the number 2 House Republican who runs the floor for the Republican caucus, I communicate directly with the Speaker and deputy leaders. I'm often called into the Speaker's office to negotiate fixes to troublesome and problematic legislation. How did I get there? I assure you it's not because I'm a radical. I have earned my bipartisan reputation through hard work, kindness, integrity, and respect for my fellow legislators. How did I get here? I'm a trial lawyer who reads and interprets legislation every day as part of my 31-year job as a lawyer. I've spent decades representing businesses, individuals, and municipalities. How did I get here? 25 years of public service. I was a member of the Police Officers Standards and Training Council, which is responsible for overseeing all training of police. I was a victim compensation commissioner, adjudicating claims for victims. I was appointed to the Judicial Selection Commission, which recommends the appointment of state judges. And I was on New Canaan's Town Council from 2005 to 2013. I am very proud of being the original proponent of outdoor dining in 2006, along with actively working on expanding sidewalks. I've volunteered many
All right,
years
thank you.
with many organizations
Victor
in
Alvarez, your
New
closing
Canaan.
statement.
My opponent is unquestionably a nice guy. I like him myself. But this election isn't a popularity contest. The stakes are high given the direction that partisan politics is taking us. I have the experience, the discipline, the courage, and the work ethic to be tough in Hartford when it comes to economic issues and to take seriously and make progress on 830G, climate change, gun laws, and term limits. And I'll vigorously protect reproductive rights, marriage equality, and other human rights. I want to strengthen our culture of democracy. I want to bring both sides of the argument to the table. You give up something, I give up something, and we reach a compromise that works for people on both sides of the political spectrum, and do so in a way that is earnest and decent. And I guarantee that if I am elected, my focus will be on improving the lives of the people in this district.
Okay, this concludes our District 125 debate. We thank our candidates and our viewers for participating in democracy. Up next is Representative District 142 featuring Lucy Dathan and Dawn Masternardi.
Thank you again, candidates, for participating tonight, and a big thank you to you, May, for volunteering and being brave enough to ask the questions for us tonight. We hope that you are inspired to become a lifelong voter. Viewers, please be on the lookout for our nonpartisan voters guide. It should be in your mailbox soon. The voters guide is just one of the many activities that the League does in New Canaan. Including voter registration, sponsoring civics education, supporting internships and scholarships, and of course, running this debate. At a time when polarizing views and rhetoric can be the norm, it is wonderful to be here together tonight, hashing out issues in a civilized and thoughtful manner.
See, you're on the right now.
Well, I know that's exactly why I double checked, because they said I was on the left, and I'm like,
I think we're okay right there.
Welcome to the 2022 Candidates Debate, moderated by the nonpartisan League of Women Voters of New Canaan. Candidates, thank you for being here tonight. We are grateful to Town Hall for allowing us to use this space, and to NCTV Channel 79 for their production of the debate. Voters, we know your time is precious, so we're hosting this in 5 separate debates so you can watch only the races that are applicable to you. A reminder that edited or partial usage of tonight's program is not permitted. For the first time at one of our debates, we are excited to welcome a select group of seniors from the New Canaan High School debate team. They got to meet our candidates tonight and will be presenting the debate questions throughout the evening. It is heartwarming to know that when asked, these students enthusiastically raised their hands and were excited about participating in our democracy. Our hope is that by having these students here, more citizens, both young, old, and in between, will tune in, get informed, and vote. Questions for tonight's debate were submitted to the League in advance from the public. I want to thank everyone who took the time to let us know the issues they cared about most this election. In accordance with our nonpartisan guidelines, we carefully selected a team to review the questions, and we often rewrite them for comprehensiveness, fairness, nonpartisanship, applicability to all candidates, and relevance to the office. The candidates have all agreed to a set of debate rules for the evening. While our students will be asking the questions, I will remain here and responsible for enforcing the rules, including time limitations. But I'm sure it won't come to that. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Grace Corcoran from the New Canaan High School debate team, who will ask the questions for this debate.
Okay. I'm Grace Corcoran. Welcome to the candidate debate for Representative District 142, serving voters in parts of New Canaan and Norwalk. Our candidates are Lucy Dathan and Dawn Mastronardi. The debate will begin with opening statements, followed by questions submitted by the public. Candidates will be allowed 1.5-minute responses, followed by an optional 30-second rebuttal. We will end with our closing statements. Based on a random draw, we will begin our opening remarks from Lucy Dathan.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters for organizing this debate and advocating for more civic engagement, and to the co-sponsors, the moderators, and student volunteers, and Don Mastronardi for your participation, and all viewers at home. Local elections are so important and truly affect our daily lives. I am proud to represent Norwalk and New Canaan for almost 4 years as Vice Chair of the Appropriations Committee. In over 25 years as a finance executive, a CPA, and a CFO, I pride myself in strategic long-term thinking. Connecticut has made great strides in the last several years, paying down $5 billion of pension liabilities, saving $440 million a year in debt servicing, refilling our rainy day fund to record $3.3 billion, and improved bond ratings and provided stability so we can avoid tax increases. We still have a number of challenges ahead and require experience and a steady hand to manage. I look forward to building on our accomplishments and discussing them with you all tonight.
Thank you. Dawn Mastronardi.
Thank you to the league. Tonight, we need to talk about some serious issues, and I'm here to talk to you guys without notes, and I'm just going to talk plainly. This is one of the most important debates and elections that we're going to have in our lifetime, and I know you hear that said a lot about every single election. But this one is one that can turn on a dime in terms of our fiscal responsibility here in Connecticut. We hear a lot from the other side talking about how they paid down a lot of the debt. That's true. The problem is, it's like an arson setting a fire to a house and then throwing water on it and taking credit for it. For 40 years, one party has ruled this state. We need change. I'm a fiscal conservative who believes in limited government, and you're going to hear a lot of talk about the abortion issue tonight. I'm a pro-choice, limited government fiscal conservative. I'm not going to be involved with this scare tactics and fear mongering. I'm going to talk up straight, and I'm going to talk about the values and issues that are important to the state.
Okay. Thank you both. We will now start with our questions. The first question is, 30 years after Statute 8030G on affordable housing was enacted, less than a quarter of Connecticut towns meet the target of having 10% of housing stock deemed affordable. What do you think are reasonable affording housing goals for Connecticut, and how would you achieve them? We will begin with Lucy Dathan.
Thank you very much. Towns want local control, and I want to enable towns to build from moratorium to moratorium, and that is the target, not 10%. We need affordable housing, especially for our young people and for seniors to stay in our communities. Not only is it good for our towns, it is good for our local economy. 830G should be reformed, and I think that the state should be thinking about how we can support towns to get to these moratoriums versus the other way around. We need more Canaan parishes, plenty of green space. No one wants a predatory builder to come to their community. I have concerns on the Weed Street and Hill Street developments due to their lack of green space. And I have stood strong against my party on zoning issues in the past. I voted no on HB 6107, a one-size-fits-all to all of our towns. And I was really concerned that this would not help communities really achieve the moratorium thresholds in an existing, meaningful way. So I look forward to additional discussion on this issue tonight because I know it is so important to our community, and thank you for that question.
You're welcome. Now we have Dawn Mastronardi.
I'm going to be clear on this. I think 830G is an awful law, and we should repeal it immediately. We talk about having a top-down approach coming from Hartford, and I disagree with that approach wholeheartedly. I'm a bottom-up person. I believe that we need to make sure that we have local control and take on builders like Carp who want to ram through affordable housing on the backs of the people that live here in this town. As somebody who started here in Norwalk or lived in Norwalk before moving to New Canaan, I can tell you what overbuilding has done in Norwalk, what it's done to our schools, what it's done to our infrastructure, what it's done to the sewage that's getting dumped into the Sound right now. We have some serious issues that we need to address, and affordable housing is one of them. But having a top-down approach from Hartford is not the way to go. I'm glad to hear Lucy say that she's against this bill, but the problem is her party is for this bill. Their party believes in ramming through these kind of things and pushing these things into towns. I disagree with that approach. I think people are better off making decisions at the local level. I think we can do that here in New Canaan. I think we've been on the right track with certain things like parishes she's talking about. But again, we don't need these huge monstrosities coming in and making New Canaan into a city. It should remain a town, and it should remain having great schools, which are what keep our property values up. And if we continue to overbuild, we're going to have issues, and we cannot continue to go down this path. 830G needs to go, and we need to pull it from its roots.
Lucy Dathan, a rebuttal.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I'm glad that we're all on the same page about having local control, but I am a little bit concerned when people said that they want to repeal a law without having something to replace it with. We need to figure out how we are going to address affordable housing. I go to doors where 25-year-olds, 30-year-olds are still living with their parents because they can't afford to find anything affordable in this area. It is important for our community, it is important for traffic, and it's also better for our environment to have families live in locally.
Okay, Don Mastronardi.
It's simple. You have town control that dictates how they want their towns to have the local zoning. And you make Connecticut more affordable by cutting taxes and keeping government efficient and small. Your party has not done that. Your party's a big government mentality that's made Connecticut the second largest tax state in the country, and that's why people can't afford and they gotta live with their parents. If we cut taxes and we make it more affordable for people to be here, we wouldn't have to have parents or kids living with their parents when they're 30.
Okay, we will move on to the second question. The second question is as follows. All states need revenue to provide services. What would you change about the ways Connecticut generates its revenue and how it spends it? Don Mastronardi.
This is a good question. As a business owner, I can tell you that a lot of the taxes come from people like myself, whether it's payroll taxes, property taxes, income taxes, and then the jobs that we create, those people pay into the system. How do we make the system more affordable for people? We got to stay nimble, but yet if we need revenues, that should be coming from making Connecticut a business environment, a more open business environment. Connecticut's lagging behind the rest of the country when it comes to business development, job growth, all this stuff since the pandemic. We continue to spend money we don't have. We continue to slam on the businesses and tax the businesses like mine. We put taxes on our meals, we put taxes on our cars, we put taxes on everything. The problem is we have government that's too big. We need to limit the size of government, cut the waste, cut the inefficiency, and make sure that revenues are coming from a base of work and business versus punishing people for their work and businesses.
Okay, Lucy Dathan.
Thank you, Grace, for that question. So Connecticut has done quite a bit in order to streamline our government. As Vice Chair of the Appropriations Committee, it is my responsibility to go through the budget on a line-by-line basis, going agency by agency, seeing where their head counts are, where they're spending their money. Connecticut has undergone a study called the CREATES report that actually looked at where agencies were and really anticipating a large scale of retirements, the silver tsunami that we are experiencing this year. And right now, our government, before the silver tsunami, our government between now and where we were in 2005 has decreased 20%. And so we have a large amount of people that are also eligible for retirement. So there is a large brain drain that's going to be going out of state government. We can all see how over the past 4 years, government has been made more efficient. We look at DMV. It used to be the big joke of where are you going to spend your day? Oh, at the DMV. And you would take a half a day off work. Now that joke is over because you're in and out of the DMV within 15, 20 minutes, half hour max if you're getting your car renewed.
where we'll begin with our rebuttals. Don Mastronardi.
I'm a little baffled when Lucy says that government's actually gotten more efficient and smaller, because under the Democrats, it's only gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. This past year, they just passed bonuses and raises for state workers that are going to cost us over the next 4 years $1.8 billion. They gave themselves raises of $12,000. They raised taxes on businesses. They put this meals tax and an extra 1%. So for them to say that they're getting smaller, more efficient, it's just not true.
Okay, Lucy Dathan, your rebuttal.
My opponent talks about the CBAC agreement and the renewal that was done this year. If we had chosen not to do anything, it would have cost another $230 million, because the vote was about renewing contracts for pay, and the amounts that we were negotiating were less than earlier amounts that were negotiated for other CBAC agreements. So there was an agreement that we had of 2.5% versus 3.5%.
Thank you both for your responses. We will now move on to the third question. Connecticut is one of the few states that does not allow a no-excuse early voting, and our legislator cannot consider early voting measures without a change to our Constitution. The November 8th ballot will ask voters if they approve such a change to our state constitution. Many voters want to know, if they vote yes, what early voting measures a candidate will support. What is your position on early voting, and if elected, what specific early voting measures would you support? We will start with Don Mastronardi and Lucy Dathan.
Thank you, Grace. We are one of 4 states that don't allow early voting, and we're some of the most restrictive. We're more like states that just don't have options in this. We need to offer more choices for people to exercise their democratic right, because we all know that if we have more people that participate in elections, we are going to have more democratic involvement. And we need to ensure that Connecticut citizens have more than just the one day between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. to cast their ballots. Not only will this ballot measure make voting more accessible to every eligible voter, it will also decrease lines on election day. It will ensure accuracy for tallying, and moreover, it'll increase security and prompt election day results. I was disheartened to see that some of my more radical sides of the General Assembly did not vote in favor of this. We had many Republicans that did vote in favor, and that was heartening, but I felt like there should have been more, because we want to make sure that we make voting more accessible and more like other states in our country. It is important that we do what we can to help everyone have that access to every authorized person to have access to the polls.
Okay, Don Mastronardi.
For me, in terms of early voting, I would have to see the details of it, but I'm always for more democracy, not less. I think we should have open primaries. I think we should support a third party. I think it'll help take some of the extremes out of what we're seeing in our politics today. I'm endorsed by the Independent Party. I'm proud of that. Obviously I'm the Republican nominee. But also I think early voting, in terms of if we're doing it 3 weeks, 4 weeks out, I don't agree with that for a couple of reasons. One, we're having our debates a couple of weeks before the election right now. For people to make a decision before they've heard the candidates, or for us to be able to lay out our plans, I just don't think is right or fair. Now, I would be more in favor of ballot measures of term limits. I think that actually would actually put people to come out and vote early, because there's done studies that early voting doesn't actually increase turnout. There's been numerous studies, you can look them up. But I think if we're going to do early voting, it would have to be the weekend before an election or the weekend before the Tuesday. And then you can do Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then have the results on Tuesday. I think that would be a better way to do it if you're going to do early voting.
Okay, Lucy Dathan, your rebuttal.
Thank you. I think when we're talking about early voting, the whole ballot initiative is whether you want to have early voting provided for. The legislature will make those provisions, whether it's going to be a local control decision or whether it's going to be something that's a sort of one-size-fits-all. So there is a lot of opportunity for the legislature in the next session to look through this. I also support open primaries. We have approved that as a legislature in the
Don
past.
Mastronardi, your rebuttal?
Again, I think if you're talking about a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach, which unfortunately I think Democrats will push, I think that's wrong. Listen, we have shucks about a brain drain. We don't have resources now to do polls. We don't have people at school. We have shortage on volunteers now. How are we going to do this for multiple election days? And this is what I worry about. We have municipalities like Norwalk that don't have a lot of money to support this. Now, how are we going to have to pay for that? Well, that means taxes are going to go up. So I would have to see how the details of this. But like I said, I'd be for a favor of the weekend before.
We do
and
have
then,
to move on.
Sorry.
So, question 4, which will begin with Don Mastronardi, is Connecticut recently enacted legislation to protect the rights of persons both receiving and providing reproductive health care services, and to codify access to more reproductive health care services providers. Do you support Connecticut's current position and why? Or what changes, if any, would you make?
For me, again, as a male, as a pro-choice Republican, I don't think it's my right to tell anybody what to do with their body, period, end of story. But that goes across everything. I didn't feel comfortable with people mandating vaccines. I didn't feel comfortable with people telling people to do masks. And I definitely don't feel comfortable with telling some woman what to do with her body, especially when she has to make a difficult choice, what to do with a baby. That's something that I can't imagine ever going through as a father. I try to put myself in my daughter's position if I was in that position and I had to make a choice. And at the end of the day, I would want my daughter to have more choice, not less. And I think making sure that abortion is a protected right is important. I just want people to understand that. I think it should be rare, safe, and legal. And like I said, I don't think it should be a decision made by a politician.
Okay, Lucy Dathan.
Thank you. Since the overturning of Roe versus Wade, I've been very proud to be living here in Connecticut, where we have been supporting women's rights to choose. And I'm a fighter. I'm going to continue to fight for this right because it is very important. But at the end of the day, even though the law has been codified into statute, it's not been codified into the Constitution. And as one of my jobs as a legislator is to change the law. So it could potentially be changed until it is codified in the Constitution. And what we've seen since 2014, the Republicans in our state house have made 30 attempts to chip away at this law and take away reproductive rights. So what's next? Do we have issues with LGBTQ rights and marriage equality? What about Griswold and our legal rights to contraception? And what about the loving and legal rights to interracial marriages? Even the ACA could be challenged if we go down that road. And I pledge that I'm always going to make sure that every Connecticut woman will always have the right to choose. I've been endorsed by Planned Parenthood. I've been endorsed by Connecticut National Organization on Women. And I want to make sure that access to health care is unconditional in our state.
Okay, thank you. Don Mastronardi, a rebuttal.
Again, I don't think we're arguing. I mean, she continued to try to scare you. I know we're close to Halloween and all. But again, at the end of the day, I will tell you exactly where I stand on the issue. I think abortion should be protected. I don't care about telling a woman what to do with her body. It's not my place to do that. And we can continue to have these debates on this, but it's a scare tactic that you're going to hear over and over and over again. We have bigger issues to deal with. Abortion ranked 6% in today's on News 12 today on issues that people cared about. People care about inflation and putting food and gas in their car.
Dathan's rebuttal.
30 times. That's the number of times we have seen just in the last several years where people are trying to take away these rights in our state of Connecticut. Whether they're requiring ultrasounds before termination, whether they are sending people to deceptive pregnancy centers and giving them false information. This is what we're up against. We need to make sure that we have fighters, not people who are going to stand on the sideline.
Well, anybody knows me knows that I'm a fighter, Lucy.
Okay, so we will move on to the next question. It will be, Connecticut residents have faced increased energy costs and service disruptions. What legislation would you propose to improve our energy and research infrastructure to ensure future access and affordability? We will begin with Lucy Dathan.
Thank you so much. We all know energy prices are out of control, and we see that with our monthly Eversource bills. We are where we are due to Governor Rowlands and deregulating the energy market, which didn't help our residential customers. We have 4 key areas that we need to be thinking about. Affordability, of course, reliability, sustainability, and accountability. We did the Take Back Our Grid Act, and that did help, but there is still some more that needs to be done. We want to make sure that we use some of the $5.4 billion of infrastructure money that's coming to our state in investing in our utility infrastructures. But we also need to consider diversifying our energy resources, investing in other renewables such as solar, wind farms that have become more competitive price-wise than fossil fuels. And I agree that we need to be thinking about nuclear energy. We have Millstone Nuclear Plant in Connecticut, which provides a large portion of our energy currently, but we really need to be thinking longer term and making sure that we don't keep kicking the can down the road and our children have to pay for our mistakes and over-reliance of fossil fuels.
Thank you, Don Mastronardi.
Well, I'm happy to hear Lucy talk about kicking the can down the road because she blamed a Republican governor when her party has run the state for 40 years. You guys in the legislature make the laws. So for you to sit there and blame Governor Rowland for our energy issues now, when 20% of your bill, your electric bill, is for taxes that subsidize renewable energies, subsidizing the poor, and 20% of that in your bill goes to non-supply or delivery on your bill. Everybody knows how much that's costing us. So again, we're talking about issues that her party has been kicking the can down the road for 40 years. We have the highest debt one of the highest debts in the country. That's because of your party. We have some of the highest electricity rates in the country. That's because of your party. We have continued taxes on everything, including stuff like highway and use tax and diesel tax that you voted for and support. This whole thing, energy above thing, I agree with. The problem is Millstone was saved by the Republicans, not the Democrats. So when she talks about how Millstone is helping, they supply 40% of our energy, she's correct. But Republicans saved that, not Democrats. So imagine if the Democrats got their way and nuclear energy was gone, you'd have 40% of your energy costs would be gone. 40%.
Thank you. Lucy Dathan, a rebuttal.
As being part of a coastal community here in Connecticut, we need to make sure that we protect our coastline. Our storms are getting stronger. One of the biggest complaints I hear on the doors are the intensity of storms. These are being caused by global warming. We need to address this. We need to remove the use and over-reliance of fossil fuels. We need to diversify our energy, and we need to make sure that we can do this in a sound, fiscally done way.
Thank you. Don Mastronardi, a response.
Again, she's talking about an all-above strategy, but she wants to get rid of fossil fuels. Now, we're knocking on the same doors. You must be talking to different people because the number one concern I keep hearing is costs, food costs, gas costs, costs of electricity. Nobody's talking about global warming, Lucy. That's what you talk about. I know you want to put California standards in because you're from California. I know you're on record with saying that you want to make Connecticut the East Coast version of California, but look what California just did. They put in a moratorium, they want to ban cars, and then 2 days later, they tell people not to plug in their electric cars.
We invite our candidates to present their closing statements, starting with Lucy Dathan.
Thank you so much. As a proud Midwestern girl from St. Louis, Missouri, I wanted to say thank you again to the League for organizing this debate, and to the student volunteers and to Don for coming to discuss these important issues. I have been proud to work for the 142nd District over the last 4 years. Although we have faced some unprecedented challenges, I have worked to build a sustainable, strategic, and balanced budget, all while lowering $650 million of taxes. We've lowered the cost of prescription drugs. We've tackled unfunded pension liabilities. We've funded our schools, including more than $300 million to schools in our district. We've added safeguards to protect reproductive freedoms, and I've kept you informed. I'm proud of these accomplishments, but there's more to do. I hope to return to the State House in 2023 to continue building on these achievements, and additionally fight for modernizing our transportation and energy infrastructure, improving access and affordability to health care, fighting to protect reproductive freedoms, and making government more efficient. I love serving you and respectfully ask for your vote in November.
And now we have Dawn Master Nardes.
Again, thank you to everybody. Thank you, Lucy. I think hopefully tonight you saw the stark contrast between my opponent and myself. I'm a diehard fiscal conservative who believes that our economy here in Connecticut is in a peril position. She talks a lot about how she's helped cut taxes, which is nonsense. She's talking about how they've got their fiscal house in order, which is not true. They're using COVID money, and they're using the 2017 budget that the Republicans got passed with 5 Democrats that's put capped on our spending. We have a lot of issues that we need to address. Global warming is not one that Connecticut can tackle on its own. That's a federal issue that should be taking control of that. Our storms are not getting stronger. That's false. We need to remember we got crime issues in this state. I'm proudly endorsed by the Fraternal Order of State Police. I'm proud and endorsed by the Independent Party, and I'm also endorsed by the Log Cabin Republicans. I'm a fiscal conservative who will only fight for your values and your expenses and
Okay.
cutting all those
Thank
for you.
you. This concludes our District 142 debate. We thank our candidates and our listeners for participating in democracy. Up next is Senate District 26, featuring Tony Boucher and Cece Marr. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, candidates, for participating tonight, and a big thank you to Grace Corcoran. Thank you for being brave enough to volunteer and ask the questions for us. We hope you are inspired to become a lifelong voter. Viewers, please be on the lookout for our nonpartisan voters guide, which should be in your mailbox soon. The voters guide is just one of the many activities the League does in New Canaan, including voter registration, sponsoring civics education in the school, supporting internships, scholarships, and of course, running this debate. At a time when polarizing views and rhetoric can be the norm, it's wonderful to be here together tonight, hashing out issues in a civilized and thoughtful manner. Thank you both.
Sorry. She's first. Oh, I see. Sorry. Hi. 60, okay.
Welcome to the 2022 Candidates Debate, moderated by the nonpartisan League of Women Voters of New Canaan. Candidates, thank you for being here tonight. We are grateful to Town Hall for allowing us to use this space, and to NCTV Channel 79 for their production of the debate. Voters, we know your time is precious, so this year we're holding 5 separate debates so you can watch only the races applicable to you. A reminder that edited or partial usage of tonight's program is not permitted. For the first time at one of our debates, we're excited to welcome a select group of seniors from the New Canaan High School debate team. These seniors got to meet our candidates, and they will be presenting the debate questions throughout the evening. It is heartwarming to know that when asked, these students enthusiastically raised their hands and were excited about participating in our democracy. Our hope is that by having these students here, more citizens, both young, old, and in between, will tune in, get informed, and vote. Questions for tonight's debate were submitted to the League from the public in advance. I want to take the time to thank everyone who submitted a question to let us know what was on their mind for this election. In accordance with our nonpartisan guidelines, Our carefully selected team reviews the questions and often rewrites them for comprehensiveness, fairness, nonpartisanship, applicability to all candidates, and relevance to the office. The candidates have all agreed to a set of rules for the evening. While our students will present the questions, I will remain here and responsible for enforcing the rules, including the time limitations. But I'm sure it won't come to that. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Elizabeth Sawyer from the New Canaan High School debate team, who will ask the questions for this debate.
Welcome to the candidate debate for Senate District 26, serving voters in parts of Darien, New Canaan, Stamford, Reading, Richfield, Weston, Westport, and Wilton. Our candidates are Tony Boucher and Cece Marr. The debate will begin with opening statements, followed by questions submitted by the public. Candidates will be allowed a 1.5-minute response, followed by an optional 30-second rebuttal. We will end with closing statements. Based on random draw, we begin with opening remarks from Tony Boucher.
Thank you. I have been deputy leader in the Connecticut State Senate for New Canaan, assistant minority leader in the House of Representatives for New Canaan, a Board of Education chair on the State Board of Education and Votech High School State Board, and also a selectman. I've held executive positions with large corporations and funded small businesses in Wilton and Norwalk, and also have been a director of a leading institutional investment company where I co-authored the white paper on ethics and nonprofits. I have an UConn MBA, working with its business school right now to create an entrepreneurship department. I've held Series 7, 63, and 31 investment licenses. This private business background gives me a real understanding of what it takes to start a business and create jobs. I've also know how painful it is to keep a business running and how much it takes to keep it afloat as the state keeps punishing businesses with high payroll taxes, high utility costs, and burdensome mandates that weigh it down. That is why the National Federation of Independent Businesses has endorsed my candidacy, and hope that you'll consider that when you vote.
Cece Marr.
Over the past 4 years, Connecticut has made incredible strides. We've gotten the state's finances back on track, addressed mental health needs, passed strong gun violence prevention laws, and begun critical investments in our infrastructure. This progress didn't happen overnight. It happened thanks to bold, focused leaders committed to taking our state forward. But we all know that we still have to do more. So how do we build on the forward momentum? Tonight, you'll hear two very different paths that lead in different directions. When my opponent was running for governor, she announced Connecticut had gone too far in regulating guns after Sandy Hook. I believe that as long as there are children dying, we have not gone far enough. I'll work to tighten our state's gun laws and am proud to have earned the endorsement of Connecticut Against Gun Violence and Moms Demand Action. I support a woman's right to choose and won't cave to extremist pressure. I'll tackle the climate crisis head on and invest in education. The question tonight is isn't where we've been, but where we want to go.
Thank you. We will now begin the first question. 30 years after Statute 830G on affordable housing was enacted, less than a quarter of Connecticut towns meet the target of having 10% of housing stock deemed affordable. What do you think are reasonable, affordable housing goals for Connecticut, and how would you achieve them? Tony Boucher?
Yes, I think that this issue is of top of mind for everyone here in New Canaan. Although laudable in its original goals, 8-30G has not paid out the way that people had expected it to be. Unfortunately, too many developers have used that as a way to really bring unaffordable housing, expensive housing, to communities that are trying to make the decisions locally, which can threaten the entire quality of life in a community and put stresses on its infrastructure for sure. Democrats were able to get these laws through committee, but paused their efforts when it was election year. And many residents wanted the state to have their hands off of their homes. However, there's deep concern that these past efforts will continue again when we start up again, no question about it. It is very difficult for local communities to absorb the student population from these high-density housing complexes, and the traffic is often intolerable. There are some ways that we can take care of this, and we can do it by allowing the current housing that we have to qualify for affordable and also allow individuals to be able to create equity in their homes. We have a lot of affordable housing stock already here. The state doesn't allow us to count it. So I really believe that we really need to reform that law, take a good look at it, change it, make it usable and workable, and allow the input of our local communities in our planning and zoning. To take away that even further, which is what is being done, just strikes as to the local autonomy of our communities.
Thank you. Cece Mar?
Yes, thank you. The statute of 8-2 was put in place to provide that control locally with towns being able to make decisions on their housing. Unfortunately, what we were seeing back in the 1990s was that the housing was not growing at the pace that it needed to in order to have housing for all of the residents. Right now in Connecticut, there is a 2.5% housing vacancy rate and only 1.5% vacancy rate in Fairfield County. Because of that, because we want to grow our economy, we need to have housing in order to bring in businesses and entice them into the state and also grow businesses within the state. We need to increase our housing stock. Right now, ASML in Wilton is putting in $200 million worth of investment. They are going to add 1,000 workers, and we need to have housing for that. Because if we don't have housing, not just for the workers we want to build our economy, but also for people who want to stay in our communities and for students that want to come back after college, we need to look at affordable housing. And I do believe there need to be amendments, but we can't just throw 830G out because it's got 30 years of zoning decisions based on it. So we do need to amend it.
Tony Boucher, your rebuttal? Oh.
Yes, please. Thank you. Right now, the state wants to have oversight over our local housing authorities. Instead, they should include existing properties that meet income-based affordability standards and eliminate the requirement for deed restrictions for owner-occupied affordable housing, which restricts the ability to create home equity. We want people to be able to create home equity.
Cece Mar, your rebuttal?
No, thank you.
I think, okay, on to question 2. All states need revenue to provide services. What would you change about the ways Connecticut generates its revenue or how it spends it? Cece Mar?
I'm sorry, could you say the question again, please?
Yeah, sure. All states need revenue to provide services. What would you change about the ways Connecticut generates its revenue or how it spends it?
Interesting question. How would I change how it earns its revenue? I'm so sorry. I'm going to ask you one more time.
No, it's totally fine. All states need revenue to provide services.
Right.
What would you change about the ways Connecticut generates its revenue or how it spends it?
Well, from a generation standpoint, I think we do need to grow businesses. We have seen right now that we have a growth in the small business development. There's been a significant growth over the past year. Small businesses, plus we are seeing this growth in the fintech services in Stamford. As a matter of fact, UConn has just put in place a fintech, the very first degree in that, in UConn Stamford to support the area. So growing businesses, growing the way that we generate revenue is incredibly important. And Governor Lamont put in place Advanced CT, which is the first office of going out into the states and bringing in businesses from outside states into Connecticut. And that has been extremely successful. And so what we need to do is continue that. In terms of how we would provide services and how we would change that, that is a very big question because it's an enormous budget and we have got to really look at where we can save money.
Perfect. Thank you. Tony Boucher?
Thank you for that question. I would ask the question rather, how can we reduce the cost of living and having a business in Connecticut? When we have a minus 4.7% GDP in Connecticut, second worst in the country, and the lowest personal income growth, the worst in the country, we need to be asking ourselves, are we taxing too much? The good news is when we were tied in the Senate, when I was there, we produced a 2017 bipartisan budget that placed a spending, bonding, and volatility cap. These spending controls, which have actually produced really great surpluses today. That common sense budget also maxed out a rainy day fund and changed the way Connecticut pays down its highest in the nation unfunded debt. Yet, more and higher taxes and anti-business policies are being pushed. We already have a 25% more payroll costs than in other states. In fact, many of our restaurants haven't survived, and yet they added another 1% on top of the 6.35% sales tax on restaurants and even prepared foods. So the question, and just recently, a 10% surcharge on corporate profits, digital advertising, a statewide commercial residential property tax was being proposed in this last session. The bottom line is we need to do something to give relief, and part of that would be to cut the income tax from 5 to 4% for families that are making less than $175,000 a year, repeal that highway tax, that diesel fuel. It's just increasing the cost of food. We also need to reduce the sales tax and eliminate that 1% tax on restaurants.
Cece Mar, your rebuttal.
I do, thank you. There's been so much growth in Connecticut. The Office of Workforce Strategy, which was put in place with the past administration, with this current administration, has really been focusing on construction, biotech, fintech. I'm so sorry, I'm confused as to your timing. It's okay. Biotech, fintech, and also healthcare. So these are areas that we really need to be focused. Okay, sorry.
Tony Boucher, your rebuttal.
Yes, as I said before, the primary focus right now in the state should be how do we keep businesses and people here? We're losing more people and businesses that are coming in. That's a very hard thing to face. In fact, the only inward bound are those from New York, where it is the only other state with higher costs than Connecticut. So we need to take a look at that. We have not reduced any of the taxes when we put in the income tax. So it's just added on, and that's why we're the second highest taxing state in the country.
Perfect, thank you. Question 3. Connecticut is one of the few states that does not allow no excuse early voting, and our legislator cannot consider early voting measures without a change to our Constitution. The November 8th ballot will ask voters if they approve such a change to our state constitution. Many voters want to know if they vote yes, what early voting measures a candidate will support. What is your position on early voting, and if elected, what specific early voting measures would you support? Tony Boucher?
Yes, thank you for that question. So many people are asking me about this question. I don't see a problem with us enacting early voting in our state of Connecticut. There are many other states that have it as well. But my view would be that we should have no excuse absentee ballot voting. That allows anyone to vote using a system that we already have in place. That would be more seamless, less problematic, and certainly a lot less expensive because the system's already in place, and they can get their ballots earlier and be able to write it in and send it in, and so they wouldn't have to come in person. Again, the high costs of creating another system, a lot of questions still remain as to how that would work, would have to be considered as well.
Cece Mar?
I think that early voting is a really tremendous idea. It was we had a referendum years ago. It didn't pass. People didn't understand it. And so there's been a lot of training and education out there right now. Connecticut is one of only 4 states in the country, that does not have any form of early voting because it is inside of our Constitution, which is why we have the referendum. In terms of the impact on registrars, I know that that is being considered. It is certainly something where there will have to be funding that goes along with it. But early voting for people who cannot get to the polls, for a mom whose child wakes up sick in the morning and now she has no one to watch the child, for someone who is working shifts that are not conducive to the poll times, for someone who is caring for a sick relative or elderly person. These are all incredibly important, and we need to allow voter access for everyone. We need to make certain that we can get people to vote, because it is their vote is their voice. Absentee ballots are definitely something that have been tremendous during the pandemic, but a huge proportion of people like to vote in person because they feel as though that is their right, and that is something that we have. Certainly, I know that I took my children to the polls when they were young to teach them.
Tony Boucher, your rebuttal.
No rebuttal, thank you.
CC Mar, your rebuttal.
No.
No. Okay, question 4. Connecticut recently enacted legislation to protect the rights of persons both receiving and providing reproductive health care services, and to codify access to more reproductive health care service providers. Do you support Connecticut's current position, and why? Or what changes, if any, would you recommend? CC Mar?
I very much support our Reproductive Freedom Act and our defense of reproductive freedom. And I think that giving the ability to make sure that a woman has a choice, that she has the capacity to not be imposed by laws that are put on her by a government, are very important. And I completely support that. And in terms of making, the only thing that I would want to do is make certain that we protect a woman's right should something happen where it becomes a national ban. I will fight to keep that from happening in Connecticut. I want to make sure that we put it inside our Constitution, because for women to have lost their ability to make decisions for themselves is not okay, and I do not accept it.
Tony Boucher?
I've supported a women's right to choose throughout my time in both the House and Senate with my voice, with my vote, with many, many debates. I've been on the record on this. In fact, I have a record that shows this voting for the morning after pill in the Senate during that time. It is codified in state law by both sides, and it will continue to do so. There are many, many difficult issues around this, no question, but Connecticut is solid. It has bipartisan support. I don't ever see that changing. Additionally, I would support a constitutional amendment to that effect so that there's no further discussion about this going forward. Anyone that would say that I would change it is just playing partisan politics on this issue.
CC Mar, your rebuttal?
I do have a rebuttal, thank you. Although my opponent says that she has always protected women's rights, in fact, she has not. And in particular, when she had the opportunity to vote for the consent laws, affirmative consent, she did not vote for that. As a matter of fact, she voted for the amendments which took apart the affirmative consent law.
Tony Boucher, your rebuttal?
I think that there are many that speak about this issue, additionally to a lot of other issues, can simply talk about it, but I've had to be there. I've had to do the work. I've had to vote. I've had to debate, and I was very, very happy to support this. This issue is very personal for a lot of people, including myself and in my own family. The decision about a woman's body must be between the doctor and a woman, no one else.
Okay, thank you. Question 5. Connecticut residents have faced increased energy costs and service disruptions. What legislation would you propose to improve our energy and resource infrastructure to ensure future access and affordability? Tony Boucher?
Well, energy is a very important topic, not just for us personally in our homes as we're seeing our heating bills go through the roof. It's also one of the main things that businesses are having to confront because not only do they have high taxes and high payroll taxes and mountains of mandates to comply with, energy cost is one of the big factors in order to stay in business. So those high energy costs in our state are a result oftentimes because many of our energy bills include a number of other fees that are put in there. And some of them are very good. They include hardship programs, energy efficiency programs, certain environmental goals in which the utilities are required to enter into contracts. However, these fees should be unbundled and put where they belong in the Department of Environmental Protection, not in the energy area. And that's why the DEEP should be changed. PURA should be a separate entity. It's energy and it has a different mission and focus. And the DEP should concentrate on environmental goals that are incredibly important as well. So separating the two would be really important. We also need to upgrade our grid to enhance reliability. This year, the Democratic control legislator is trying to usurp some control over this, and we want to make sure that we bring it back and concentrate on our sources of energy. Because as we are promoting alternative fuels, solar energy, we also have to recognize that 40% of all of our energy comes from nuclear, our one nuclear plant, and certainly natural gas, which a lot of people find controversial.
CC Mar, your turn.
The energy costs are really, they're high. I'm seeing it in my own home. It is not something that I'm looking forward to this winter. I've had to change my own planning on how I'm going to pay my energy costs. It's a problem. I'm not quite sure where Ms. Boucher comes in on the nuclear, but we do have, for the next 10 years, we do have our costs coming, our energy coming from nuclear, and it is one of the cleanest energies that we have. One of the things that we need to be doing is looking at renewables and ways of making sure that we make it easier for people to put solar power up, that we create more of our wind farms. It is incredibly important that we look at green energy and ways that we can include that into our grid. And that includes looking at net metering. So as we're giving our as people put solar on and it goes into the grid, when it comes back out, we have net metering so that people are not paying the costs of having the solar. So there's a lot to look at in terms of energy. The costs are high. We need to address it, and we will do that in the legislature when I'm there.
Tony Boucher?
Yes, I absolutely embrace alternative fuels. And in fact, in my investment business, we worked very hard to invest in alternative and new ways to provide the energy that we need in our new global economy. Unfortunately, however, the high business costs and doing business state also affects the cost of our energy. They exceed the national average. These costs are reflected in the utility rates. The cost of salary, wages, land taxes, including property taxes, are some of the highest in the nation, and these costs are passed on.
Perfect, thank you. CC Mar?
No, thank you.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Yes, no? Okay. Other than reducing taxes, what ideas can you offer for Connecticut to attract? Oh, sorry. We invite our candidates to present their closing statements, starting with Tony Boucher.
Throughout my service, I worked hard to seek compromise, civility, and respect on all sides of the contentious issue. 80% of the time, Democrats and Republicans agree. 20% of the time, the issues can become very difficult. Compromise is what makes government work, passing effective laws by getting both sides to agree. Today, this is considered an anathema. The political climate has been much like rival gangs trying to prove loyalty by demonizing the other. Bipartisan civility compromise are what we need a lot more of today, and I helped to negotiate many bipartisan bills, including the Sandy Hook gun bill, where I joined 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans to help craft our land bipartisan control bill of 2013. I actually got primaried as a result. I voted for bills that enhanced a woman's right to choose, the morning after pill, gay marriage, and the 2017 budget bill that changed the way Connecticut pays down its debts and produced the current surplus. A tie in the Senate yielded much better results than partisan bickering. That's what we need to get back to. Thank you.
CC Mar?
Thank you. This November, we're at a crossroads. in the aftermath of the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade and threatening to strip women of fundamental rights, and the continued Republican-led efforts to undermine common sense gun laws, Connecticut's future is on the ballot. This election is also about the very fabric of our state, the kind of Connecticut that you want to have for yourself and for your children. There are two very different visions in this race that will lead to two very different futures. In my years of service as a licensed social worker, then executive director of Person to Person, and most recently at Sandy Hook Promise, I've developed a history of concrete results, meeting the needs of today and planning for tomorrow. I'll do the same as a state senator, creating opportunities and delivering outcomes that benefit us all. The 26th district needs a leader who can look forward, not backward, one who puts the needs of everyday people over partisan politics.
This concludes our Senate District 26 debate. We thank our candidates and our viewers for participating in democracy. Up next is Senate District 36 debate featuring Trevor Crow and Ryan Fazio. Thank you.
Thank you again, candidates, for coming tonight. And a big thank you to you, Elizabeth, for volunteering and being brave enough to ask the questions tonight. Viewers, please be on the lookout for our nonpartisan voters guide, which should be in your mailbox soon. The voters guide is just one of the many activities that the League does in New Canaan, including voter registration, sponsoring civics education in the schools, supporting internships and scholarships, and of course, running this debate. At a time when polarizing views and rhetoric can be the norm, it's wonderful to be here together tonight, hashing out issues in a civilized and thoughtful manner. Thank you. Can you turn that? Thank you. Students can sign. Can you turn the names? Welcome to the 2022 Candidates Debate, moderated by the nonpartisan League of Women Voters of New Canaan. Candidates, thank you for being here tonight. We are grateful to Town Hall for allowing us to use this space and to NCTV Channel 79 for its production of the debate. Voters, we know your time is precious, so this year we're hosting 5 separate debates so that you can watch only the races that are applicable to you. A reminder that edited or partial usage of tonight's program is not permitted. For the first time at one of our debates, we are excited to welcome a select group of seniors from the New Canaan High School debate team. These seniors got to meet our candidates tonight and will be presenting the debate questions throughout the evening. It is heartwarming to know that when asked, these students enthusiastically raised their hands and were excited about participating in our democracy. Our hope is that by having these students here, more citizens, both young, old, and in between, will tune in, get informed, and vote. Questions for tonight's debate were submitted to the League from the public in advance. I want to thank everyone who took the time to let us know the issues they cared about most this election. In accordance with our nonpartisan guidelines, our carefully selected team reviews the questions and often rewrites them for comprehensiveness, fairness, nonpartisanship, applicability to all candidates, and relevance to the office. The candidates have all agreed to a set of debate rules for the evening. While our students will present the questions, I will remain here and be responsible for enforcing the rules, including the time limitations. But I'm sure it won't come to that. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Alex Arnold from New Canaan High School debate team, who will ask the questions for this debate.
Welcome to the candidate debate for Senate District 36, serving voters in parts of Greenwich, New Canaan, and Stamford. Our candidates are Ryan Fazio and Trevor Crow. The debate will begin with opening statements followed by questions submitted by the public. Candidates will be allowed a 1.5-minute response, followed by an optional 30-second rebuttal. We will end with closing statements. Based on a random draw, we will begin with opening remarks from Ryan Fazio.
Good evening. Thank you, Alex, for moderating. Thank you, Trevor, for being here, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting us. My name is Ryan Fazio. I'm very proud to represent Greenwich, Stamford, and New Canaan in the state Senate. As soon as I got elected, I went to work across the aisle in order to solve the challenges facing our district. I wrote and passed legislation to improve student mental health with long-term interventions in schools in legislation that was called by one social psychologist a first-in-the-nation program. I worked collaboratively with my Democratic colleague on the Aging Committee in order to protect the interests of seniors. And I was the only state senator to submit legislation in order to change 830G and protect local control of zoning. In the next 2 years, we must deliver positive change to our district to improve our economy, protect local control, and the public safety for New Canaan, the 36th district, and all of Connecticut. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan Fazio. And now opening remarks from Trevor Crow.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. A little bit about me and my background. I've been in Fairfield County for 20 years. I've raised my children here. I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, where I was a competitive figure skater. By the time I was 18, I wasn't landing triples, so I had to go to college. I graduated from Wellesley College and went to Wall Street, and I was in sales and trading for 5 years. After that, I went to Harvard and got an MBA. Once my kids got to school, I knew I couldn't make that commute, so I got another master's in marriage and family therapy. So for the past 16 years, I've been a practicing small business owner therapist, and I've been helping families solve problems. It's been my honor. So I would like to take these capabilities from the grit, the perseverance, to the understanding and enjoyment of business from Harvard Business School and helping people find common ground to Hartford, because doesn't Hartford need a therapist?
Thank you, Trevor Crow. 30 years after Statute 830G on affordable housing was enacted, less than a quarter of Connecticut towns meet the target of having 10% of housing stock deemed affordable. What do you think are reasonable affordable housing goals for Connecticut, and how would you achieve them? Ryan Fazio.
Recently, since I've been in office, I met a young family in New Canaan who lives on Weed Street, who recently moved to this town for all it has to offer, made an investment in a single-family home in a single-family home neighborhood because that's where they want to have their family and build their future. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, an 105-unit development comes to Weed and Elm Street, totally out of the blue, going around all of the zoning and regulations that our town has to offer in order to protect the interests of the town, because of state law and because of state leadership that wants to override local control and undermine the interests of this community and other communities around the state. I was the only state senator in this term to introduce legislation to change 830G to protect local control of our housing and zoning. That bill that I introduced was not advanced by the state legislature because the Democratic leadership refuses to change 830G and actually wants to advance legislation that will further undermine our local control, including a bill that will effectively double the 830G housing mandate. The moratorium process through which New Canaan, even though it does a good job at advancing affordable housing, was recently denied, is too convoluted. There's only 1 or 2 law firms in the entire state which actually deal with moratoriums. This law has failed our town. It's failed our state. We need to start anew. I have already started down the path of providing the leadership in order to provide that change.
Thank you.
I am not a big proponent of 830G at all. I know we do need to make change. Towns have all been asked to do something called 830J, which is their vision of what is reasonable and possible for their towns. Greenwich, I believe, I think most towns are late. I'm not sure if New Canaan has got their 8:30J in, but we do. I haven't knocked on a single door where someone said to me, "No, I don't want a policeman here. I don't want the teacher to live down the street." Nobody says that ever. Everybody wants these people in our communities, including me. I would like to see my children be able to move back to my community. They could not afford it right now. I have single mom friends who cannot afford to live in their kid's school district because it's costing so much money to rent right now. So there has to be a way that we find a possible way forward where we build reasonable housing for all the jobs. We have 110,000 unfilled jobs in this state. We have a housing crisis right at our doorstep. We need about 25,000 units built in Fairfield County. And because we're bringing so many jobs in, ASML is bringing in 2,000 jobs in chip making, we need places to put these people. So again, I'm going back to what towns can do, how we can collaboratively put ideas together between public-private partnerships and our housing communities. Thank you.
Trevor Crow. Now, rebuttal from Ryan Fazio.
Yes, first and foremost, we need leaders in Hartford who will actually put pen to paper and propose specific legislation in order to change 830G. We also need to change the makeup of the state legislature in order to advance reforms to 830G and protect local control of zoning. New Canaan, for the first time in the last 4 years, has had 2 Democratic state legislators, part of the majority. They had their opportunity to reform 830G and work with the leadership in order to accomplish that. As long as we have 65% one-party rule in this state, we're not going to change 830G.
Trevor Crow, your rebuttal.
Yes, I believe that we can change 830G, and I would have a seat at that table to propose ways to actually, right now, the whole 830G thing has come off the table because of interest rates are going up, and it's costing in the supply chain too much to build these buildings. What I want to see is us work with builders to build units that make sense for our communities, and that's the most important thing of all of this. We need to solve that problem.
Thank you, Trevor Crow. All states need revenue to provide services. What would you change about the ways Connecticut generates its revenue or how it spends it? Trevor Crow.
Yes, we have to tax our people to be able to pay for services, for roads, for bridges, etc. I believe we could work on getting our taxes down. What I like about the Lamont administration is they had done a very good job with fiscal responsibility and paying down unfunded liabilities. Because of that, we are paying less, $440 million less in interest rates, and we also have a higher bond rating right now, which is lowering our borrowing costs. That's actually a tax break. The other thing the Lamont administration has done, including the legislature, is a historic tax cut of $640 million, and that has helped families with child tax credit, free buses, gas tax holiday, and seniors get tax-free pension and annuities. So I know that we need to tax to pay for our services, but I also want to do it in a way that's reasonable and that we find efficiencies in our government and that we figure out a way so people don't feel overly taxed. What I do hear at the doors are young families. When I get to the doors, I get the baby's sleeping. And then the next thing I ask is, why are you moving to Connecticut? Because it's cheaper here than New Jersey and New York. And our quality of life, our great education system, and families feeling safe here. So we're actually a tax deal. I do still believe we can work on it, even with estate and gift taxes. We could hopefully bring those down as well.
Thank you. Ryan Fazio.
Connecticut families are taxed too much already. According to the Tax Foundation Wallet Hub, Connecticut has the second highest tax burden of any state in the country, second only behind New York. That's unacceptable. It's no surprise to me that we've had the 4th lowest population growth in the country over the last 10 years and the 4th lowest rate of economic growth over the last 4 years under that regime, under that paradigm. Hartford takes too much from our families as is. We need to reform our tax system, simplify it, broaden the tax base in order to reduce income tax rates and retirement income taxes across the board in order to incentivize long-term economic growth, give you back thousands of dollars more that you work hard to earn so you can raise your family here, so that you can build a life here, and so that you can afford to retire here. When I talk to families, when I talk to retirees, without fail, they tell me that it's too expensive to retire here, that they're thinking about leaving the state. That's not right. We need to make it affordable to age in place here. We need to reduce the tax burden in order to ensure that there is investment and job creation and turn around those moving vans. I love this community. I think it's the best place imaginable to raise a family and to build a life. But as long as we have the second highest tax burden in the country as we do now, as long as our state legislature continues to raise taxes as they have several times over the last 10 years, that won't be guaranteed to last. We need a positive change and we need economic leadership.
Trevor Crow, your rebuttal.
Yeah, that's dead wrong. We were number 2 in the country last year in one-way moves to Connecticut. We were behind just New Mexico. So no, families are coming here, and we have to keep the support and the building our jobs. But mostly, Ryan, why did you vote against a tax cut? You voted against seniors getting pension annuity tax cut. I don't understand it. I do hear that you wanted a tax cut at a bigger rate, which means now.
Thank you, Trevor Crow. Ryan Fazio, your rebuttal.
The last sentence at least was correct, that I introduced legislation in order to deliver a $1.2 billion tax cut because the windfall of cash to the state budget coffers from inflation and federal dollars is yours, is the taxpayers, and needs to be returned directly to taxpayers. I voted against the budget because it was all gimmicks. There was no permanent serious tax relief, and there was an 11% year-over-year increase in spending, which means higher taxes down the line for the taxpayers of the 36th district.
Thank you.
That's unacceptable.
Connecticut is one of the few states that does not allow no excuse early voting, and our legislature cannot consider early voting measures without a change to our Constitution. The November 8th ballot will ask voters if they approve such a change to our state constitution. Many voters want to know if they vote yes, what early voting measures a candidate will support. What is your position on early voting, and if elected, what specific early voting measures would you support? Ryan Fazio.
Thank you, Alex. I think voting should be easy, secure, and fair. I voted in favor of a law this year crossing party lines in order to make it easier to vote by absentee ballot. I was criticized by some of my friends to the right in order for doing so, but I think it was the right thing to do. We effectively already have early voting in this state. Even now, you could go to the town clerk's office during business hours tomorrow and vote early in-person absentee ballot. That is reasonable, I think, a reasonable accommodation for people who cannot go to the ballot box on election day. But this open-ended system where you can have months-long election days called early voting, I do not think is reasonable or fair. And there are several studies, including at the University of Wisconsin, the University of Arkansas, and recently from Yale University, that say that early voting regimes do not increase voter turnout because they devalue the view or the value of election day in the eyes of voters. It also means that millions of voters across the country vote with very different information than others. We should make it easy to vote, encourage voting on election day, have absentee ballot laws that are highly accommodative and that ensure security. But this open-ended, kind of chaotic system, I don't think is reasonable. We need a balance.
Thank you. Trevor Crow.
I am absolutely a supporter of early voting. We need at least 2 to 3 weeks. If you have kids, you understand that a lot of times you cannot make it on that one day because you're busy or somebody gets sick or In my case, one kid had broke their arm once. So things happen. So I do believe we need more time to do this. Yes, Ryan is correct. We do get to do absentee ballots. It has been increased through COVID. We've proven we can make this happen in a good, reasonable way. But I do believe to support our democracy, we need to give people enough time to get to the polls. And again, when you have a family and life is very complicated, it's really tough to get there on just one day. And boy, oh boy, I've had those really tough days.
Thank you. Ryan Fazio, your rebuttal.
Yeah, and again, I think it should be easy to vote absentee. There should be more excuses to vote absentee because life is difficult, and the 14 hours to vote on Election Day, obviously it's a lot, but having the month of absentee voting, including in-person absentee voting, which is effectively early voting, is a reasonable accommodation. But all of the evidence says that early voting, the open-ended early voting regimes in other states does not increase voter turnout. So what it means is that party machines are changing the makeup of electorates, not increasing voter turnout.
Trevor Crow, your rebuttal.
I'm just say very simple. I believe in early voting, and it should be with minimally 2 to 3 weeks. I would be even happy with mail-in voting. There are a couple states like Washington State that do it. I believe our democracy is based on people being engaged, and the easier you make that engagement, the better off we all are. So I've got 100% behind early voting.
Thank you. Connecticut recently enacted legislation to protect the right of persons both receiving and providing reproductive health care services and to codify access to more reproductive health care service providers. Do you support Connecticut's current position and why? Or what changes, if any, would you recommend? Trevor Crow.
I support this bill 100% with my entire body. I can't tell you how strongly I feel about this. We have set ourselves up as a safe haven state. It gives women a chance to have proper health care. This is a health care issue. It's also how we are as people. We become second-class citizens if we do not have bodily autonomy. I am appalled that Dobbs happened, and we've now seen a completely new world out there. And there are young people, it's this terrible story, it's a 10-year-old who had to leave her state because she was raped, only 10 years old. She had to go to a different state to obtain the proper health care. And had we not been, by the way, we're nationally in front of this issue. That girl, if she had come here, she could have been extradited, and her health care provider could have been extradited and prosecuted. So this is an incredibly important piece of law that I'm thrilled that we have here. And it also, remember this, makes us competitive. There's companies out there that are coming to our state because they know their employees can get proper health care. So this puts us out front. I am incredibly proud of this. And we also need more abortion providers. You'll hear more about that in a second.
Thank you. Ryan Fazio.
I support legal abortion in the state of Connecticut. Leadership of the Republican caucus in the state Senate, in the state House, and the Republican gubernatorial candidate agree with that position as well. We also need to maintain high health and safety standards for the procedure in the state. That's why I joined 17 Democrats in voting against HB 5414, which is the subject of the question, because according to at least 6 independent medical organizations, it could have, quote, a disastrous effect on patient safety. They urged the legislature to please oppose this well-intentioned but flawed legislation. I also introduced legislation at the beginning of the term in order to improve access to contraception, in order to reduce unplanned pregnancy. But it should remain clear to everyone that both me and my opponent support keeping abortion legal in the state of Connecticut. Of course, my opponent has unfortunately been lying about my position in public, but my position should be very clear, and the position of both Republican leadership and Democratic leadership in the state of Connecticut should be very clear that abortion should remain legal in the state of Connecticut.
Thank you. Trevor Crow, your rebuttal.
Okay, first of all, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology has called for it's actually on their front page referendum of teaching more people to our nurse APRNs, midwives, to perform abortions. We need to increase access. More states that don't do it, there's another generation of providers who cannot perform abortions, which is going to be a big problem going forward. Yeah, if there's a constitutional amendment, Ryan, would you actually vote for it? For Roe?
Thank you. Ryan Fazio?
Again, in policy, I support legal abortion in the state of Connecticut, irrespective of how that's codified. But again, the organization that my opponent's quoting is not actually discussing the bill in question. 6 medical organizations said that the bill in question that my opponent supports would reduce the standard of care for women and reduce patient safety in the state of Connecticut. That's why Republicans and Democrats voted against it. But again, my opponent continues to be dishonest about my position. I support legal abortion in Connecticut.
Connecticut residents have faced increased energy costs and service disruptions. What legislation would you propose to improve our energy and resource infrastructure to ensure future access and affordability? Ryan Fazio.
Under 12 years of one-party state government, Connecticut has become unaffordable, and our energy costs, our electricity costs, are the highest in the continental U.S. That's unacceptable. In part, it's because we have a horrible utility company in the state. It's also because we have horrible leadership and state policy. We could do far better to make our energy portfolio affordable, reliable, and clean. I introduced legislation with colleagues this year in order to do just that. One is to give more independence and power to the Consumer Protection Agency of the state government, PURA, which is currently subordinate to other, more political bureaucracies. 2 is to simplify the renewable portfolio standard so all forms of clean energy compete on an equal playing field against one another in order to find the most affordable source. And 3 is to examine the 20% of our energy bill that is due to state mandates and taxes, reevaluate and roll back those programs that increase your electricity bill by 20%. As long as we have the highest electricity costs in the continental U.S., we have no chance of building manufacturing jobs, of supporting small business, of keeping retirees here, and making our state prosperous and affordable for all people. So we need a change in our policy. I spent half of my career in the renewable energy sector and believe I'm prepared to balance the considerations of the environment and the considerations of the economy for our residents.
Thank you. Trevor Crow?
Well, due to deregulation, which was a Republican deal back in the 90s, we did end up with a monopoly that is doing not a particularly good job, and we need better regulation on them. And they're making double-digit profits, and Pura should be on top of them. Now, we're making progress, but what we really need to be doing is pivoting towards renewables. That's the solution. We should not be relying on natural gas, which we've been doing more so since the 2000s when we went from oil and coal burning to more natural gas. At the time, it was a good idea. It was cheap, and we were in the fracking boom. Right now, we are now exporting a lot of our natural gas to Europe because of the Ukraine-Russian war. So what we need to do, and hopefully quickly as possible, is invest in renewables. We need to invest in the grid, and this should be part of our regulation over Eversource, which is they need to be showing us what they're doing with the grid. Along with metering. We need better metering, and we have a lot of houses, et cetera, that are analog. Once we're in a digital place, we can handle the grid better. So there are things that we can be doing. One thing is potentially more nuclear energy, smaller plants. It's a little scary, but it is much cheaper, and I don't know how safe it is, but we have other areas that we can be building, and I'd like to see more wind and solar. And my opponent voted against EV charging stations and the Clean Air Act. And if we go to renewables, we also help the environment.
Thank you. Ryan Fazio, your rebuttal.
I think this style of politics where you criticize someone on the basis of the name of a bill they vote for and against is not sufficiently serious for the state of Connecticut. I think a lot of people in this state would be surprised to hear that we're making progress when we have the highest electricity bills in the continental U.S. and they continue to go up and up and up and make life unaffordable for everyday people who are currently trying to look at heating their homes in the winter. We need real solutions. We need specifics. The types of energy projects like the unaffordable New London project is not acceptable.
Thank you. Trevor Crow, your rebuttal.
I still believe we can, our affordability, you voted against child tax credit and free buses, et cetera. So there are ways that, there have been solutions, you chose not to vote for it, so.
Thank you. We invite our candidates to present their closing statements, starting with Ryan Fazio.
Thank you to the League. Thank you, Alex. Representing New Canaan and Greenwich and Stamford is the honor of a lifetime. This, for the life of me, I think is the best community imaginable to build a life. But our community and our state faces immense challenges. If the state leadership is able to sweep the state legislative elections here in New Canaan and reassert a supermajority, then there will be much more at risk here in New Canaan across a 36th district. A statewide property tax is supported by the President of the Senate. Doubling 830G requirements is supported by the state leadership. And taking away our school resource officers is supported by the state leadership. We need a positive change in direction that will only be begotten by a balance in the state legislature. We need to reduce taxes and the cost of living, protect local control of our housing and change 830G, and protect the public safety and support our law enforcement for all people. We can do better, and that's why I ask for your vote on November 8th. Thank you.
Thank you. Trevor Crow, your rebuttal.
Thank you again for having.
Closing statement.
Oh, closing.
My
I think
apologies.
you've got it. Okay, in closing, thank you so much for having me here. My priorities are, number one, economic growth. And unlike what Brian is saying, we are really doing incredibly well. Lamont is bringing in fintech, biotech, and aerospace business and jobs. He has also put our fiscal house in order and the legislature. I want to continue working on that. I do not want to see any more cans kicked down the road. We've done this long enough. And just like that larger tax credit that Ryan's talking about, that's exactly what that does. And we've seen that from the Republicans. I don't want to see any more of that. Women's reproductive rights, absolutely. I am just a huge champion. I would not like to see anything taken away from this. And the Republicans over the past 15 years have tried to chip away at Roe 30 times with different legislation. So you cannot believe those words. It's codified law. And gun safety. What's more important, your Second Amendment or second graders? I will protect children. I will go after every gun safety measure possible. And I never want to see another Sandy Hook.
This concludes our Senate 36 debate. We thank our candidates and our viewers for participating in democracy.
Thank you again, candidates, for participating tonight, and a big thank you to Alex for volunteering and being brave enough to ask the questions for us tonight. We hope you're inspired to become a lifelong voter. Viewers, please be on the lookout for our nonpartisan voters guide, which should be hitting your mailboxes soon. The voters guide is just one of the many activities that the League does in New Canaan, including voter registration, sponsoring civics education, supporting internships and scholarships, and of course, running this debate. At a time when polarizing views and rhetoric can be the norm, it was wonderful to be here with you tonight, hashing out issues in a civilized and thoughtful manner. Thank you.